Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a really nice day. I knew we were going to have a large crowd, but this is an important topic because I talked to growers about this, and I knew it was slow because my cell phone and office phone is the least it's rung since the flood happened, as actually was yesterday afternoon and today. So that tells me people are out and about and trying to get stuff done. If you haven't met me yet, I'm Nathan Mueller, the Extension Educator for Dodge and Washington County. Cropping systems, not livestock. We have several people in the room from the university that cover that area, so we'll have questions for them. The agenda is pretty loose and opportunity for ask questions. Plenty of time because the presenters will essentially have short 15-minute presentations. Plenty of times for questions because your questions are going to be very specific to your operation. And to cover that in a slide set, we'd never cover it all. So please ask questions as we go through. I am recording this, so you have someone else you know that wasn't able to make it. I'll record it and put it on my website. I'll show you what that is before you leave today. But kind of the timeline, we'll have Daren Redfearn and Kristen Ulmer talk about just forages, annual forages, systems, species selection, nutrition on the livestock side. Then I'm going to have NRCS talk on EQIP and how that plays into it. And then, of course, the logistics when it comes to all that for crop insurance. I have Scrivener Insurance and some representatives here in the back that will give a short presentation, and we can have a Q&A on that too, because all three of those things are going on that we have to consider when we're talking about growing annual forages. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daren, and again, just ask us questions as we go through. If you didn't, there's pop, water, chips, and cookies, and when you came in the entryway, that's where the bathrooms are at, so feel free to get up and use them whenever needed.
Against my better judgment, I went ahead and decided to use the microphone a little bit instead of trying to scream at you guys. You hear that okay back there? Okay, very good. So as Nathan said, my name's Daren Redfearn. I'm on campus, University of Nebraska. I'm in the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture. My specific title is Extension, Forage, and Crop Residue Specialist. So I cover a wide range of topics. Some of you guys are probably more familiar with Dr. Bruce Anderson. He and I overlap in our expertise quite a bit, although I do tend to focus a little bit more on some of the annual forages. As when we talk about management options, I know this is an awfully difficult time, and I'm not ever really sure how to approach this, but at least in my mind, I think about the needs that we have when we start getting into some of these situations where we have a lack of forages. And really, it's not, at least from my perspective, not a lot different than we have from a forage shortage that we would have during a time of drought, okay? Because the thing that's common is that we're still looking for a way to produce forages, okay? So we have some immediate needs. I think the time scale on this may be what's a little bit different because I do think oftentimes the droughts tend to be a little bit more shorter time frame than some of the issues that we'll be dealing with some of the recovery after this flood situation. And so we've got the immediate needs, we've got some short-term needs, medium-term needs, and then also we've got long-term. So a lot of our thinking process, I think, is going to be quite the same. But as I had indicated, our time frame for these needs is going to be a little bit different, okay? I think the thing that we can all agree on today is that we have all four of those needs, but the most critical are going to be these first two. Is going to be the immediate needs, and then it's going to be the short-term needs as far as meeting some of our forage options. So when we think about the possibilities, we've got a range of possibilities. The first one that comes to mind is, well, there's an option to do nothing. I don't think that anybody is going to take that approach. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today to hear some of the information we're presenting. Hay and supplemental feeding. Has anybody used that strategy yet? Yes. How long are we going to have to continue to use the hay and supplemental feeding strategy? Hopefully as short as possible, but I do think that one is still going to be necessary, at least maybe in the immediate future and potentially in the short time future, until we can get some of this forage production rolling again. One of the things that I thought about, I do know Nathan is pushing some of the wheat production up here. Some of that wheat that would be planted for grain, I think last year when it was planted, you know, that could be a pretty good short-term forage option, okay? Not promoting that one way or other, but it's just one thing to keep in mind. I think the next place when we start thinking about including some annual forages, I think some of these soybean acres will probably be a little bit easier to get some of these annual forage systems going in, primarily because they're not going to have the residue that may be present in some of the cornfields. Starting to get a little bit of questions about alfalfa stands, and I'll talk briefly about that in a few minutes. And then also these perennial grass pastures, okay? First, I mean, I got probably 2 days after it flooded, we started getting questions on what are we going to do about pasture recovery. Because, well, the first thing we've got to do is wait for the water to recede so we can see what we're dealing with. The thing that I discounted was the amount of sand that was deposited on some of these areas. Okay, we had assumed there would be some, but I think just the amount is the thing that's a little bit surprising to me. Still don't have a good answer for that yet. Okay, so we'll continue to think about that one. And then these corn acres, I saw some coming in. You know, there's Nathan said that the guys that aren't here today probably doing field work. It's likely they're applying anhydrous. Saw quite a number of anhydrous tanks on the drive up today. So the corn guys are out busy doing some things. So when we look at these needs and these possibilities, there are some options there, I think, that we can approach. Said that I talked a little bit about some of the alfalfa. So when we start looking at alfalfa stands, this is some information out of Wisconsin. And basically, they're counting stems per square feet, which is I think, to me, is a little bit easier to understand than it is the plants. But I've got some arrows here on the 40 stems per square feet. The picture has got the production potential is the rest of that word up there. So basically, if you're looking at somewhere around 50 to 55 stems per square foot, your stand is still going to be fully productive. Once you get to that 40 stem per square foot, where you're looking at about 3/4 of production, that may be a time you need to start thinking about going in, and maybe during this time, not necessarily when you're going to renovate that stand or replant that alfalfa, but what can you add into that to increase the forage production, okay? And when I get to the next few slides, right now what we're looking at in the next, and we're about at the end of that window, oats is about the only possibility that we've got from an annual standpoint to still plant during the spring and get any kind of appreciable forage production yet this spring and early summer, okay? If you want to think about it, including some perennial grasses in the orchard grass would be a good one. Again, now's a good time to stick that in. So we do have some options on some areas that especially if they weren't impacted much by some of the floods, but they still are going to need a little work. So I think that alfalfa that's there is still going to be quite valuable, but it may need a little help from a grass component. Forage options we've got, and there's good news and there's bad news in this. And the good news is there's an awful lot of choices that we have, okay? The bad news is oftentimes when we make a decision on trying to plant something, seed availability can be an issue. And this is what I'll spend the most time on, talking a little bit briefly about some of the pluses and minuses that we have of each one of these different species. And then when we get to the next slide where we talk about doing some forage systems, I think some of this will begin to make a little bit of sense for you guys. When we talk about cool season species, and again, these are going to be only the annual forages that we're talking about, okay? The small grains are those are going to be the go-tos, okay? During the spring, our option right now is oats, okay? And we're just about at the tail end of the prime planting window for oats. Although I did see a load delivered to campus yesterday, so not everybody's got their oats planted, okay? Oats is also a good one for planting in the fall after wheat harvest, so sometime around early August. Oats is the one that I prefer for spring planting, to be used for some late spring, early summer grazing, and then also for a fall planting for some fall grazing, okay? Mira Dranowski is, I think she has done quite a bit of work on looking at grazing some growing cattle during the winter. And we've done some work in some small plot studies where we've looked at the oats, and it does stockpile very well, okay? Especially if you mix it with some of the brassicas or the turnips. So, and the thing that I like about the stockpile on the oats is that you can plant it, you can let it grow, and it's going to accumulate whatever production it's going to have. But then the quality, even though it declines, it doesn't decline very rapidly. And I think, Kristen, you're going to show some of this type of data today, and when I finish. So just kind of keep that in mind as Kristen talks. Then the other small grains, the rye is very commonly used. It works much, much better as a fall planted small grain forage that we can graze in the spring. Okay, the cereal rye is not going to offer us a whole lot of growth yet this year, even if we plant it during the spring. Triticale, wheat, and barley, from those we can find spring types, and we can also find winter types. The spring types could be planted during the spring. They're not going to offer quite the production that the oat does, but they could be a pretty good option if you can't find any oat seed. Seed cost on these, they're all in the same ballpark, so one's not substantially greater in cost than the other one. The brassicas that we talk about, typically we see those planted in the fall. Okay, they do quite a bit, have quite a bit good production in the fall. They can be planted in the spring. The difference being on the spring planting, they're looking to bolt and produce seed, so their production is not going to be quite as great. Probably of those I've got listed, the turnips, the purple top turnip is going to be the least expensive of the rest of those, and it will still produce the root on it that might offer some feed value as well. Okay. Questions on those cool seasons before I move to the warm seasons. That's all pretty standard stuff there. Okay. The warm season species that we have, the summer annuals, that's the group there is probably going to be the group that's going to be the next good chance for us to produce quite a large amount of forage. Okay. The sorghums are what I've got listed first. The Sudan grass, the sorghum Sudan grass, and the forage sorghum, those are all sorghum species. The Sudan grass is preferable to me for grazing because it does have the capability to produce quite a bit more regrowth than either the Sudan grass crossed with sorghum or the forage sorghum. The Sudan grass also is going to have a lower prussic acid potential than either that sorghum Sudan grass or the forage sorghum. Forage sorghum is the highest, Sudan grass is the lowest. That sorghum Sudan grass hybrid is intermediate between the two. Okay, Sudan grass also is a pretty good hay crop because it has a finer stem, dries a little bit quicker, and more importantly than that, it does have the capability to regrow. Okay. If you're looking at something you're not quite sure about, that sorghum Sudan grass hybrid, that's a pretty good one. I have heard that seed availability on that may be reduced this summer, but I haven't confirmed that with any of the seed salesmen yet, although that is a little bit of a concern to me. Those sorghum Sudan grasses, those are probably, you can, oh man, there's going to be almost 100,000 of those different varieties. Those things are pretty crazy. They have brown midrib, non-brown midrib. The deal on the brown midrib, they've got an altered lignin component to it, which increases digestibility. Okay, so if you're looking at some growing calves, that one might be a little bit of a preferential selection. One of the other ones that I like a lot is a brachytic dwarf. It's a crazy looking plant because it has compressed internodes. The whole plant is not but about as tall as I am, but the inner nodes are compressed, and it's a very leafy looking plant. And you can find that with the brown midrib gene or not. Okay, it doesn't quite offer the yield potential because it doesn't have the stem. Okay, if you're looking for something that's going to produce a lot of biomass, it's probably that sorghum Sudan grass hybrid. That forage sorghum is one that doesn't regrow. It's one that's most commonly used for silage production. Okay. Pearl millet is a pretty good one. It doesn't have the prussic acid potential. Oftentimes you see millet mixed in with the sorghum Sudan grass or the Sudan grass. Okay. Its growth is not going to be as tall, but it does, tend to offer something a little bit different, tends to dilute, at least in my mind, that prussic acid potential, at least a lot early in the season when you're grazing. The German foxtail millet, foxtail, a lot of people refer to that. That's the one with the big drooping seed head on it. The big drooping seed head on it has been known to cause some issues, mouth problems in cattle and horses in particular when you wait that long to harvest it for hay. The big advantage of the foxtail millet is that it's a very quick plant. Okay, from planting until hay harvest is about 45 or 50 days before it pops that seed head. Okay, downside is it doesn't have as high a production as some of either the pearl millet or also the sorghums, but it does have a very fine stem, so the hay does dry very quickly, but the quality on it is not that great. Okay, so it would be something that would be, I would consider that kind of a low input hay crop. I don't have teff mentioned up here. Is anybody fooled around with that teff? You don't look too excited about that. So that teff is kind of an interesting critter. And from a growth standpoint, it is a very quick seed germinator. And again, from planting to first hay harvest can be very quick, 45 to 50 days. The challenge with its seed bed has to be more like an alfalfa seed bed. Okay, very shallow planting date. If you planted a quarter of an inch, you just about got it planted too deep. Okay, it's highly drought tolerant, but it does take a little bit of moisture for the seed to germinate. Okay, I know guys that do harvest it for hay. Any experience harvesting it for hay or grazing? There's always a question on that. I think it works better for a hay crop because it is so shallow rooted. The animals tend to pull that out some. But again, that's another option. Then these other things that you hear and see about, oftentimes these wind up to be in a lot of these warm season mixes. Sunflower is a pretty common one. Cowpea, and I've listed mung bean. Mung bean tends to be grown a little bit further south and out west. To me, it's similar to cowpea, but the yield is a little bit lower. It does a little bit better under drought than the cowpea. Cowpea is going to have higher production. Okay, and sun hemp. My jury is kind of out still on sun hemp, but I do think when we are getting into situations like we are, there is some work out of Missouri where they've looked at overseeding sun hemp, and sun hemp's a summer annual legume. Okay, they've gone in and drilled sun hemp in tall fescue pastures to increase the production of those fescue pastures a little bit more during the summer. Increase the quality somewhat as well. When it gets some age on it, it has a pretty good ropey, fibrous stem, so the palatability does tend to decrease. One of my co-workers up on campus has looked at, in smooth brome pastures, overseeding sorghum Sudan grass into those, okay, in early June. And he's had a fair amount of success doing that. The challenge is that it doesn't really get very productive until the end of the summer. Okay, so it's not a quick fix, but it does offer something for increasing a little bit of forage production. Okay, so that's kind of my very quick and dirty about a lot of these summer annuals. This stuff I'm talking about today is you can find all that in those net guides and other colored sheets. It's in that pile in front of you. If you have any questions, my contact information is on the last slide. So when we talk about trying to piece together some annual forage systems, again, these two examples are in that document there that Jerry Valesky and Mary Dranowski put together. We'll look at the top one quickly at the beginning. And so when we look at this one, kind of where we are right now is over here in this part of the calendar, okay? And you can see that very brief window where we're talking about planting cool season annuals, okay? We're about at the end of that planting window, and your option is oats. Okay, so we're pretty restricted. The next thing you notice is that the grazing may not occur until the latter half of May, first part of June. Okay, so that's my comment, that there's some options that we have, but they're certainly not immediate fixes on anything. Okay, I think our best option to really do some damage on forage production is going to occur here latter part of May, early part of June, when we start focusing on planting some of these warm season annuals, the pearl millet, the Sudan grasses, sorghum Sudan grass crosses, those kind of things. Okay, potentially start some grazing on those middle of July. Okay, in this particular scenario, that'll carry us through almost till the 1st of October. Okay, if we manage it pretty hard, fertilize it, and graze it appropriately, we can get that to continue on till first frost. We talked about the stockpiling ability of those cool season annuals. The sorghum Sudan grasses and the Sudan grass, that's another one that would be a pretty good option for providing some stockpile forage to graze during the winter. The key thing that we need to focus on then is this time of the year here during late July or early August, basically to get us into the winter, okay? This one assumes that we're going to feed some hay during the winter, okay? So to graze during October, November, we're going to have to plant something back during late July, early August. Anybody want to guess what I'm going to tell you is the best option there? At oats with turnip, okay? That's just, I mean, that's the go-to. That's almost, to me, that's the no-brainer, okay? Those darn turnips will just about grow anywhere. We've had pretty good success with about 60 pounds of oats and 3 or 4 pounds of turnip. Those brassicas really cheapen up that mixture a little bit. You don't lose a lot of production. This example down at the bottom half of that slide, there's a lot going on this one. A lot of the things that we still see, my little circle disappeared somewhere. This one is more or less the same as the one we looked at on the top. This winter annual from the fall can be grazed a little bit earlier than the one on the top, but this one is actually planted back during September, okay? So to be grazing any cool season pasture this time of year right now, that would have needed to have been planted last fall, okay? I did see some of the rise around looks about like this. Some of it may be a little bit taller. That's going to be a good option here. If it'll stay warm the next 2 or 3 days, that'll really jump. Everything else is going to get to be pretty similar. That's the one that we saw on the top with that late March, early April planting to grazing June, early July. This warm season is the one that we saw earlier for grazing. Here's the same cool season that we saw. This one tries to address more of a year-round grazing system, if you will, from annual forages. Now, the challenge of that is what? I got one more circle up there than I do on the other one, okay? So I've had guys look at this before and they scratch their head. And that's the reason I got into this forages is because I didn't like all that farming, which was, planting one time a year. Here's 4 times for you guys that really like to drive the tractors. Okay, so you can piece together some pretty elaborate schemes that's going to carry you through a lot of the year from a forage production standpoint. Important planting dates. These are the good ones here. These are on your handouts. Before September 1, summer annuals are the best choice. Cool season annuals, you can have some success on those, but those are pretty risky. Again, oats may be the best option there. That time between August 1st to September 1st, that's a pretty good sweet spot right there. Okay, cool season annuals are the best choice, and by best, I mean they're probably going to offer you the best chance at yield. You can be successful with some summer annuals if we have timely rain and we continue to have some warm weather on into the fall. After September 1st, cool seasons are your best option. There is some risk with the spring species such as the oat. At that time, you're probably looking better options would be some of the winter hardy small grains. Rye would be the good one. Winter triticale, winter barley, anything with a winter in the front of it's going to be a pretty good option there. Okay. After October 1, cool season annuals, I call them the best choice. They're probably the only choice at that point. Summer annuals are just too risky. The cool season spring annuals have a same amount of risk. You will get them to germinate and establish, but the plants won't get much taller than this. Okay. What'd I do, Nathan? So take-home messages from today. Planting date is the thing that you really need to focus on. And all this is related to that fall time frame. Delayed planting in the fall is going to reduce the fall growth potential. We still see these delayed fall planting effects carried over into the spring on forage production. So timely planting during the fall, even for grazing the following spring, is still important. Always get questions on mixtures, and you get all kind of responses depending on who's doing the research and who's presenting the data. One of the things that we do see is that the data is I call it non-clear based on the variability. What we do see, though, is we have 1 or 2 species that usually dominate. 3 or 4 will contribute. If there's grass in there, that's the one that's nearly always going to be 90% of the production. Okay, so it's going to be extremely important to have a heavy grass component in these mixtures. The legumes and the other broadleaves just really don't compete very well with the grasses if they're planted at the right time for grass growth. Okay, and then Kristen's going to talk about the quality of these annual forages, but especially on the fall planted ones, we can get some pretty substantial yields in the fall that have a very high quality. And the thing that, and this holds true for both the summer annuals that are grown during the fall, and then also the cool season annuals that are grown during the fall, that quality will persist quite a ways into the winter. Just because it turns brown doesn't mean the quality's gone away. Okay? And we'll probably do questions after everyone gets finished, unless somebody has a hot burning question now. Some of the information that you can look at, those 2 websites there, if you Google range pasture forages, that website will come up for you. There's some information there on a little bit of what we talked today, but just a ton of other pasture and range and forage issues. The other one that you would Google would be beef forage crop systems. The beef.unl.edu website will come up. It'll have a lot of the information that we've talked about today, and again, plus some additional information that's there.